In the vast, unforgiving wilderness of northern Minnesota, the wind whispered through towering pines, carrying secrets as old as the earth itself. At just 7 years old, Sarah's fragile world was shattered by loss. She knows the rules of survival that her grandfather taught her. Stay silent when danger's near, trust your instincts, and remember that the forest provides everything you need, if you understand its language. When 3 armed men invade their remote cabin, searching for something hidden and willing to kill for it, Sarah faces a terror no child should endure. Hidden in a secret crawlspace beneath the floorboards, she clutches the wooden bobcat carving her grandfather made for her, her small hands trembling as the chaos unfolds above. What the intruders don't realize is that in this wilderness, a little girl is never truly alone. Luna, a sleek, wild bobcat with piercing golden eyes and spotted fur, moves silently through the shadows, watching, waiting. They thought she was just a child. They didn't realize the forest was watching, and it was ready to fight back. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The northern Minnesota wilderness stretched vast and unforgiving beneath the heavy February sky. 7-year-old Sarah Reynolds pressed her small body deeper into the hidden crawlspace beneath the wooden floorboards, her breath forming tiny clouds in the frigid air. Above her, boots stomped across the cabin floor, sending dust filtering through the cracks onto her pale face. "Find the kid," a harsh voice commanded. Dawson said the old man mentioned a granddaughter. "She has to be here somewhere." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She could still hear her grandfather's urgent whisper as he'd pushed her toward the hidden door in the pantry floor. "Remember what I taught you, little bird. Stay hidden until it's safe, no matter what you hear." Then came the sounds. Terrible thuds and crashes, her grandfather's voice, suddenly silenced. Now these strangers were tearing the cabin apart, looking for her. Sarah clutched the small carved wooden bobcat her grandfather had made for her last birthday, its smooth surface worn from countless touches. A single tear traced down her dirt-smudged cheek, but she made no sound. Grandpa Jack had taught her well. The wilderness demanded silence when danger lurked nearby. What the intruders didn't know, what even Sarah couldn't fully comprehend, was that human footsteps weren't the only ones moving through the cabin now. A low growl, nearly imperceptible, vibrated through the floorboards. Luna had returned from her morning hunt. Sarah Reynolds hadn't always lived in the remote cabin deep in Minnesota's North Woods. Once, she'd had a sunny yellow bedroom in Minneapolis, parents who kissed her goodnight, and a school where she'd been learning to read. That life had ended abruptly when an icy highway and a jackknifed semi-truck took her parents from her on a snowy December evening 2 years ago. With no other immediate family willing to take her, Sarah had gone to live with her mother's father, Grandpa Jack, the hermit of Basswood County as locals called him. Jack Reynolds had retreated to the wilderness after his wife's death 15 years earlier, building a self-sufficient life 40 miles from the nearest small town. At first, social services had been reluctant to place a traumatized 5-year-old in such isolation with a 70-year-old man. But Jack Reynolds had fought fiercely for his granddaughter, making rare appearances in town to meet with officials, promising to bring her in regularly for schooling assessments and medical checkups. "The wilderness will heal her," he'd insisted. "It healed me when I had nothing left." Sarah had arrived at the cabin mute with grief, a tiny ghost child who flinched at touch and stared vacantly at the towering pines surrounding her new home. Jack, despite his gruff exterior, showed unexpected patience. He didn't force her to speak. Instead, he simply included her in his daily routines, checking trap lines, identifying animal tracks, splitting wood, preserving food. "The forest provides everything we need," he told her, though she rarely responded. "You just have to learn its language." Slowly, over weeks that stretched into months, Sarah began to emerge from her cocoon of loss. She started with small tasks, sorting pine nuts, stacking kindling. The first time she spoke again was to correct Jack when he misidentified a bird call. "That's not a chickadee," she'd said softly. "It's a nuthatch." Jack had turned to her, his weathered face breaking into a surprised smile, eyes suddenly bright with moisture. "You're right, little bird. Good ears." By the time Sarah turned 6, she had adapted to wilderness life with the resilience only children possess. She knew how to read the changing sky, how to move silently through the forest, how to respect the wild things that shared their remote territory. The cabin had no electricity, no running water, and certainly no internet. But it had walls lined with books that Jack had collected over decades, and Sarah devoured them by lantern light. During their monthly trips to town, the locals watched the transformation with amazement. The hollow-eyed, silent child had become quick and observant, with sun-streaked hair and knees perpetually scraped from climbing trees. Dr. Cooper, the aging town physician who checked on Jack's heart condition, declared her healthy as a young bear cub, despite her unconventional upbringing. Not everyone approved of their lifestyle. Marjorie Dawson, the county's child welfare officer, made quarterly visits to the cabin, her lips perpetually pinched with disapproval. She documented the lack of modern amenities and socialization opportunities, though she couldn't deny Sarah's obvious physical health and intellectual development. "She should be in school with other children," Marjorie insisted during each visit. "This isolation isn't natural." "Nothing about losing your parents at 5 is natural," Jack would counter, his voice level but his eyes hard. "She's learning what she needs to survive." What Jack never mentioned to the officials was how deeply Sarah's trauma still ran. Though thriving in daylight, nightmares still plagued her, sending her scrambling into his room many nights, shaking with remembered fear. On particularly bad nights, they would sit on the cabin's porch wrapped in quilts, identifying constellations until her breathing steadied. It was during one such night, beneath a canopy of stars during the harshest winter in decades, that Luna came into their lives. The temperature had plunged to 30 below zero for a week straight. Game had grown scarce, and even Jack admitted they might need to make an unscheduled trip to town for supplies if the cold snap continued. That evening, as they finished a meager dinner of canned beans and the last of their smoked venison, Sarah froze, her head tilted toward the window. "Something's crying," she whispered. Jack listened but shook his head. "Just the wind, little bird." But Sarah was already pulling on her insulated boots and heavy coat. "No, Grandpa. Something's hurt." Jack knew better than to dismiss her instincts. The child had developed an almost uncanny awareness of the forest's rhythms. Sighing, he layered on his own cold weather gear, lit the heavy-duty flashlight, and followed her outside. The night air bit like steel teeth. Sarah moved with certainty through knee-deep snow, following a sound Jack could barely detect, a faint, high-pitched mewling that seemed to come and go with the wind. She led him nearly a quarter-mile from the cabin to a fallen pine. There, trapped beneath a splintered branch, lay a bobcat kitten, its spotted fur rimed with ice, one leg twisted unnaturally. "Don't touch it," Jack warned, as Sarah immediately dropped to her knees beside the injured creature. "Its mother might be nearby." Sarah shook her head, gently brushing snow from the kitten's nearly motionless form. "She's dead, over there." She pointed toward a darker shadow in the snow, the unmistakable form of an adult bobcat, already stiffening in death. "Looks like the tree fell on them both. This one's still breathing." Jack played the flashlight over the scene. The mother bobcat showed no wounds except those consistent with the falling tree. Likely seeking shelter from the brutal cold, the pair had chosen the wrong haven. "Sarah," he began cautiously, "we need to let nature take its course. That kitten won't survive, and even if it did, it's wild, not a pet." Sarah looked up at him, her face set with a determination he recognized all too well. The same expression his late daughter had worn when her mind was absolutely made up. "Everything deserves a chance to live," she said simply. "You gave me one." Before Jack could respond, Sarah had slipped off her scarf and was gently wrapping the nearly frozen kitten. With careful hands that belied her young age, she cradled the tiny predator against her chest and stood. "We need to warm her slowly, like you showed me for frostbite." Jack knew he should refuse. Nothing good could come from bringing a wild predator into their home, even a dying juvenile one. But something in Sarah's unwavering determination stopped his objections. Since losing her parents, she had rarely asked for anything. "If it survives the night, we'll reassess," he conceded, already mentally calculating how to construct a secure enclosure in their storage shed. The bobcat kitten, which Sarah immediately named Luna for the full moon that had illuminated their rescue mission, defied all expectations by surviving not just the night, but the week that followed. Sarah slept beside the box they'd prepared, waking every 2 hours to administer the diluted milk mixture Jack reluctantly showed her how to prepare. The broken leg was splinted, and against all odds, the frostbitten extremities began to heal. By spring, Luna had grown from a sickly 5-pound kitten to a robust young bobcat with keen golden eyes and a distinctive pattern of spots that darkened as her adult coat developed. Jack had constructed a series of connected enclosures behind the cabin, planning for the day they would transition the recovering predator back to the wild. But that day never quite seemed to arrive. The problem wasn't Luna's physical readiness. The bobcat had healed completely, growing sleek and strong on the diet Jack and Sarah carefully researched and provided. The issue was the extraordinary bond that had formed between the child and the wild animal. Luna followed Sarah like a shadow whenever allowed outside the enclosure. The bobcat would lie patiently while Sarah read aloud from her books, and somehow, in a way that made Jack genuinely uneasy, seemed to understand commands that Sarah whispered to her. Most disturbing was the night Jack awoke to find Luna somehow free from her secure enclosure, curled protectively at the foot of Sarah's bed during one of the child's nightmare episodes. "She keeps the bad dreams away," Sarah explained the next morning, stroking Luna's spotted head while the predator purred, an unnerving sound from an animal that should have retained its wild wariness. "Sarah," Jack said carefully, "Luna isn't a house cat. No matter how tame she seems, she's a wild animal with instincts we can't fully understand." Sarah's expression grew solemn. "She understands more than people think. She's my friend." Jack worried that Sarah's attachment to the bobcat was becoming unhealthy, another manifestation of her trauma. Yet he couldn't deny that since Luna's arrival, the nightmares had decreased dramatically. Sarah smiled more, spoke more, seemed more fully present in a way she hadn't been since coming to live with him. During Marjorie Dawson's next quarterly visit, they kept Luna hidden in the farthest enclosure. But somehow, Jack never figured out how. The caseworker discovered the Bobcat's existence. "This is beyond irresponsible," she'd snapped, her face flushed with anger. "It's dangerous and illegal to keep a wild predator, especially around a child." "Luna would never hurt me," Sarah had interrupted, her small hands balled into fists. "She's family." The phrase sent a chill through Jack. He'd seen how Luna seemed to anticipate Sarah's needs, how the two communicated through glances and subtle movements. It wasn't natural, yet it wasn't threatening either. If anything, the Bobcat had appointed herself Sarah's protector. The incident triggered increased scrutiny from authorities. Marjorie filed reports questioning Jack's fitness as a guardian, citing the unhygienic and dangerous conditions of allowing a wild animal near a child. Wildlife officials made a visit, though Jack had been forewarned by Sheriff Ellis, a former hunting buddy who understood the old man's situation. "They'll confiscate the cat and likely put it down," Ellis had warned over the crackling phone line from town. "And honestly, Jack, they might have grounds to review Sarah's placement too." Jack had prepared a convincing story about releasing the rehabilitated Bobcat months earlier, keeping Luna hidden deep in the forest during the official visit. The wildlife officials seemed satisfied, but Marjorie Dawson remained skeptical, increasing her visits and scrutiny. It was during this period of heightened tension that Jack's nephew Michael appeared at the cabin for the first time in over a decade, accompanied by his business partner, Eric Daniels. Their unexpected arrival in a mud-spattered SUV set Jack immediately on edge. "Uncle Jack," Michael greeted with forced joviality. "Look at you playing wilderness grandpa, and this must be little Sarah." Sarah, who had been teaching Luna to respond to specific bird calls, a game they played in the forest clearing behind the cabin, regarded the visitors with silent suspicion. "What brings you all the way out here, Michael?" Jack asked. "Last I heard, you were living in Chicago." "Real estate development," Michael explained, as Eric wandered the perimeter of the cabin, seemingly assessing the structure and surroundings. "Actually, that's partly why we're here. This area is seeing increased interest from buyers looking for authentic wilderness experiences without sacrificing modern comforts." Jack's expression hardened. "This land isn't for sale." No, Michael laughed, though his eyes remained calculating. "But there are mineral rights questions with some of the surrounding parcels. We're just doing due diligence. Actually, we'd love to take a look at your deed, clarify some boundary issues." The conversation had grown increasingly tense until Sarah had deliberately knocked over a lantern, creating a distraction that ended the visit prematurely. After the men departed, promising to return, Jack had sat heavily in his chair, his face grave. "I don't trust them," Sarah said, voicing Jack's own thoughts. Jack nodded slowly. "Michael's father, my brother, always had his eye on this land. The mineral surveys done years ago showed potential deposits worth developing. I thought that interest died with him." That night, Jack drove into town alone to speak with Sheriff Ellis and check on his safe deposit box containing the property documents. What he learned troubled him deeply. There had been recent inquiries about his property and suspicious activity around records related to adjacent parcels. More concerning, Ellis mentioned reports of claim jumpers operating in the more remote areas of the county, using intimidation tactics against elderly landowners. When Jack returned to the cabin the following day, he immediately implemented security measures he hadn't used since his military days. He showed Sarah hiding places, escape routes, and established specific signals and protocols. "If anything happens to me," he told her with unusual gravity, "you take the emergency pack, follow the creek north for 2 miles, then cut east to the Anderson property. Don't trust anyone but Sheriff Ellis." Sarah, perceiving the seriousness of the situation, had nodded solemnly. That night, Luna had refused to return to her enclosure, instead prowling the perimeter of the cabin like a sentry. 3 days later, the intruders came. Now, crouched in the crawl space beneath the floorboards, Sarah could hear the men ransacking the cabin above her. "The old man's not talking," one voice said. Dawson swore he had documentation of the original mineral surveys. "They have to be here somewhere." "Forget the papers," another replied. Dawson said if we can't find them, we make sure nobody's around to contest the claim. Clean job. Make it look like the old man had an accident. Sarah bit her lip to keep from crying out. Grandpa Jack was hurt. Maybe worse. Her fingers tightened around the wooden bobcat carving as footsteps approached the pantry. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream tore through the cabin, followed by a crash and gunshot. Above the chaos, Sarah heard an unmistakable sound. Luna's battle cry, a sound she'd heard only once before when a wolf had ventured too close to the cabin. "What the hell is that?" someone shouted. "Shoot it!" Another gunshot, the sound of glass breaking, men cursing. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Luna was fighting for Grandpa Jack, for their home. Despite her grandfather's warnings, Sarah couldn't stay hidden while Luna faced danger alone. With trembling hands, she pushed open the concealed door and peered into the chaos of the cabin. The scene that greeted her was one of stunning violence. Luna, her spotted coat bristling, had positioned herself between an unconscious Jack and two armed men. One intruder was already down, clutching a savagely bleeding arm. The other raised his gun toward the snarling Bobcat. "Luna!" Sarah cried out, distracting the man just enough for Luna to launch herself at his weapon arm. What happened next would later be dismissed by authorities as the exaggerated perception of a traumatized child. But Sarah knew what she saw. As Luna engaged the armed intruder, a sound echoed from her throat. Not a typical bobcat cry, but something deeper, more primal. From the surrounding forest came answering calls. The first shadow appeared at the broken window. A male bobcat, larger than Luna, his tufted ears laid flat against his head. Then another slipped through the doorway, and another materialized on the kitchen counter. Within moments, 4 wild bobcats had entered the cabin, drawn by Luna's call. The injured intruder scrambled backward, his eyes wide with terror. "What the hell, Ritter? We gotta get out of here!" The man wrestling with Luna managed to kick her away, firing wildly as more bobcats approached. But the animals moved with coordinated precision that defied explanation, herding the men away from Jack's motionless form, backing them toward the cabin door. Sarah rushed to her grandfather's side. A gash on his temple leaked blood, but his chest rose and fell with steady breathing. Relief flooded through her as she pressed her small hand against the wound. Outside, the men's panicked shouts competed with the collective growls of the bobcat hunting party that had surrounded them. Luna returned to Sarah's side, her golden eyes alert, coat spattered with blood. Whether her own or the intruders, Sarah couldn't tell. "Luna," Sarah whispered, pointing toward the rifle mounted above the fireplace, the one Jack had taught her to use for emergencies. The bobcat seemed to understand, leaping to knock it down into Sarah's waiting hands. With a confidence that belied her 7 years, Sarah loaded the rifle the way her grandfather had shown her and stepped onto the porch. In the yard, the bobcats had formed a tightening circle around the two men, who stood back to back, one still armed but clearly recognizing the futility of their situation. "Don't move," Sarah called, her voice surprisingly steady as she raised the rifle. "Luna's family doesn't like you, and neither do I." The armed man, Ritter, swung his pistol toward her voice, but before he could aim, the largest male bobcat launched himself at the man's back, sending the weapon flying from his hand. For several long minutes, they remained in this tense standoff. The wounded men surrounded by vigilant predators, Sarah keeping the rifle trained on them with small but steady hands. Then came the blessed sound of approaching vehicles. Sheriff Ellis and his deputies, alerted by the gunshots reported by a passing forest ranger. "Sarah Reynolds," Ellis called as he approached cautiously, taking in the extraordinary scene. "Are you hurt? Where's your grandfather?" "Grandpa's inside," Sarah replied, not lowering the rifle. "These men hurt him. They were going to kill us and take our land." The Bobcats, as though understanding the arrival of human authorities, began to melt back into the forest, all except Luna, who remained firmly at Sarah's side, her sides heaving with exertion, blood now visibly matting her left shoulder. As deputies secured the intruders, Sheriff Ellis gently took the rifle from Sarah's hands. "Let's get your grandpa some help," he said softly, his eyes never leaving the wounded bobcat that stood protectively beside the child. "Luna needs help too," Sarah insisted, kneeling beside her companion. "She saved us. She called the others." Ellis, a lifelong outdoorsman, knew enough about wildlife to recognize how extraordinary the bobcat's behavior had been. "That's not possible," he murmured, but without conviction. As medics worked on Jack inside the cabin, Dr. Cooper, who had accompanied the emergency response team, reluctantly examined the wounded bobcat who allowed his approach only with Sarah's reassuring touches. "She's lost a lot of blood," he told Sarah gently. "And I'm not a veterinarian. The bullet wound is serious." Sarah's face crumpled. "You have to save her. Please." Cooper looked from the child to the remarkably docile wild predator that had, according to the apprehended intruder's panicked confessions, orchestrated a coordinated attack with other wild bobcats, an unprecedented behavior that defied scientific explanation. "I'll do what I can," he promised, administering emergency first aid to stabilize the animal until they could reach proper facilities. In the chaotic hours that followed, Jack regained consciousness in the hospital with a concussion and fractured collarbone, but no life-threatening injuries. The intruders were identified as hired men working for a shell company connected to Michael Reynolds and Eric Daniels, who were subsequently arrested in Duluth. Marjorie Dawson was implicated as well, having provided information about the cabin's layout and Jack's habits in exchange for promised kickbacks from the mineral rights acquisition. Luna, however, remained in critical condition at the regional veterinary hospital, where staff marveled at both her unusual bond with Sarah and her inexplicably domesticated behavior. Despite their best efforts, the prognosis was poor. 3 days after the attack, the veterinarian called Jack's hospital room with grave news. Luna had taken a turn for the worse and wasn't expected to survive the night. When Sarah overheard, she became inconsolable, insisting on being taken to Luna's side immediately. "She needs me," she sobbed. "She won't leave without saying goodbye." Against medical advice, Jack discharged himself, and Sheriff Ellis drove them to the veterinary hospital where Luna lay unresponsive, her breathing shallow, body temperature dangerously low. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," the veterinarian said gently as Sarah pressed her face into Luna's cooling fur. "She fought hard, but the damage was too extensive." "She's not gone yet," Sarah insisted, her voice muffled against Luna's neck. "She's waiting." Jack placed a comforting hand on his granddaughter's shoulder, his own heart breaking for this additional loss in her young life. "Sometimes, little bird, we have to let go," even when it hurts more than anything. Sarah lifted her tear-stained face. Number, she needs her family, like she called them before. Before anyone could stop her, Sarah had scooped up Luna's limp form and was running toward the exit. Jack and Ellis followed in bewildered alarm as she burst into the parking lot, carrying the Bobcat that should have been far too heavy for her small frame. "Sarah!" Jack called. "Stop!" But Sarah continued to the edge of the woods behind the veterinary clinic, where she laid Luna gently on the ground. Standing with her arms outstretched, she called into the gathering dusk, not with human words, but with a high, keening sound that raised the hair on the back of Jack's neck. Ellis reached for his sidearm, unsure what the distraught child was attempting. "Jack, she's not thinking clearly." Jack held up a hand, his weathered face intent. "Wait." For long moments, nothing happened. Sarah's calls continued, growing hoarser but more urgent. Then, just as Ellis was preparing to intervene, movement flickered at the forest edge. A pair of reflective eyes, then another and another. Like silent ghosts, Bobcats emerged from the trees. The same hunting party that had defended the cabin, recognizable by their distinctive markings. They approached cautiously, forming a circle around Luna's motionless form. The largest male Bobcat, bearing a battle scar across his muzzle, approached first, sniffing Luna's wound. "Please," Sarah whispered, "help her like you helped us." What happened next defied rational explanation. The Bobcats began to gather around Luna, pressing their bodies against hers, some licking her wounds, others simply maintaining contact, as though transferring their warmth and vitality into her failing body. The ritual continued for nearly an hour as humans watched in stunned silence, none daring to interfere with this unprecedented wild communion. As darkness fell completely, Dr. Cooper arrived, having been called by the concerned veterinary staff. He approached the scene with professional skepticism that quickly gave way to astonishment. "Her core temperature is rising," he murmured, carefully checking Luna's vital signs. I can't explain this. The profound hypothermia she was experiencing can sometimes mimic death in smaller mammals, but this recovery..." Gradually, incredibly, Luna's breathing deepened. Her whiskers twitched, and finally her golden eyes opened, finding Sarah's face immediately. A weak purr rumbled from her chest. The wild Bobcats, their mysterious work apparently complete, began to withdraw, melting back into the darkness until only the scarred male remained. He touched noses briefly with Luna before disappearing after his companions. "That's not possible," the veterinarian whispered, her clipboard forgotten in her limp hands. "She was actively dying." Jack knelt beside his granddaughter, who was cradling Luna's head in her lap, the Bobcat now visibly stronger with each passing moment. "The forest provides everything we need," he said softly, echoing words he'd told Sarah long ago. "If we learn its language." Spring came to the northern Minnesota wilderness, bringing renewal after the long, eventful winter. The cabin had been repaired, with some modernizations that Jack had finally conceded to. A solar power system, satellite internet for Sarah's distance learning program, and a proper two-way radio for emergencies. The criminal cases against Michael Reynolds, Eric Daniels, and Marjorie Dawson had proceeded swiftly, bolstered by documentation Jack had secretly maintained about previous suspicious inquiries and threats. The attempted murder charges and conspiracy counts ensured they would remain imprisoned for many years. More importantly, the scrutiny over Sarah's living situation had transformed. The remarkable events, witnessed by law enforcement and medical professionals, had been impossible to dismiss entirely, though official reports carefully avoided direct references to the Bobcats' inexplicable coordinated behavior or Luna's miraculous recovery. Dr. Cooper, who had become an unexpected ally, argued persuasively that Sarah's unconventional upbringing had developed extraordinary resilience and skills that had literally saved both her life and her grandfather's. A new social worker, assigned after Dawson's arrest, proved more understanding of their unique circumstances. Luna had recovered completely, her wounded shoulder bearing a silvery scar beneath her spotted fur. Though Jack had constructed a new, more spacious enclosure, Luna came and went freely, sometimes disappearing into the forest for days before returning to Sarah's side. More remarkable were her regular visitors. The Bobcat family that had come to their aid continued to maintain a presence around the cabin. The scarred male, whom Sarah had named Guardian, could often be spotted on nearby rock outcroppings, his attentive gaze surveying the clearing. "It's like we have sentinels," Jack observed one evening as he and Sarah sat on the porch, watching fireflies rise from the meadow grass. Luna lay stretched beside Sarah's chair, her tail occasionally twitching in acknowledgement of shadows moving at the forest edge. Sarah nodded, her fingers absently stroking Luna's spotted head. They understand family. Jack studied his granddaughter's profile, noting how much she'd grown and changed in the past year. The traumatized child who had arrived at his doorstep had transformed into something remarkable. A young person deeply connected to the natural world in ways he was still coming to understand. "We're going to be all right, aren't we, little bird?" he asked softly. Sarah turned to him, a smile spreading across her face, a full, unguarded expression that had once been rare but now came more easily. "We always were, Grandpa. We just needed to find our pack." As if in agreement, Luna stretched and purred, her golden eyes reflecting the last light of the setting sun. In the forest beyond, answering calls echoed through the twilight. Wild voices acknowledging that in this remote corner of the wilderness, the boundaries between human and animal hearts had blurred, creating something rare and precious. A family bonded not by blood, but by something deeper and more enduring. Jack Reynolds wrapped an arm around his granddaughter's shoulders, and together they listened as night fell over their protected domain, watched over by golden eyes that understood more than anyone could explain.